Hey YouTube, this is EbbenMagician34, and I'm coming at you with Tuesday's The Edge, where we take one card and take a look at it as sort of a tech option and something just sort of food for thought. This is a card I saw teched at a number of decks at States this past weekend, and I think it's worthy of looking at, and that's Masquerain. This is a Team Plasma Masquerain, whose attack and HP and retreat, none of that really matters. All that matters is its ability, which is called Tool Reversal, which basically just as often as you want, you can take your tools off your Pokemon and return them to your hand. And a lot of people have tried this in different ways before in kind of real lower tier decks, and this card's never gotten that much notoriety, really. But recently, it's gotten a lot more. And a lot of what it has to do with is these cards right here. And of course, these aren't the only ones, but Spirit Links have a lot to do with it. Spirit Links, of course, allow you to skip the agonizing drawback of Mega and Primal Evolution, which is losing a whole turn, just ending your turn where you don't get to attack, which is pretty bad for you. But of course, attaching this tool means you can't attach other tools to the Pokemon, which can also be pretty problematic. You'd probably like to attach something else if you could. So Masquerain essentially lets you run fewer copies of your Spirit Link, which you can Skyla for, or depending on the deck, you could even Corvina for. Things like that, and then you can reuse them, so you need fewer copies of them. So like even if you had like 3 Primal Groudons, you could use 1, maybe 2 Spirit Links and just bounce them back to your hand and reuse them. And you don't have to use a one-shot card like Tool Retrieval. Instead, Masquerain can just bounce it as much as you want, which is pretty awesome. And speaking of these particular guys, wouldn't it be nice to be able to bounce back something like Floatstone with them? Because after all, some of these Pokemon like Mega Aggron or Mega Groudon, for example, have very high retreat costs. The ability to drop Floatstone, retreat, and then bounce Floatstone to your hand is like having a switch instead of a tool, for example, that you can play on as many Pokemon as you want, provided they're not asleep or paralyzed or something, which usually isn't much of a concern right now in this meta. This is amazing, because basically, as long as you can play the Floatstone, retreat, and then bounce it back, Starling Megaphone isn't really relevant. And if the Pokemon gets knocked out, he doesn't drag your Floatstone down. So you can run fewer copies of Floatstone, and it's a lot less vulnerable to your opponent interfering with it, which is pretty amazing. That's part of what makes Masquerain so useful, so utilitarian. And speaking of things like Mega Aggron would especially appreciate the ability to say, bounce that Spirit Link back and replace it with a Trick Coin to help get around his Coin Toss and his ability, which is yet another cool ability, which is yet another cool thing Masquerain can do. And if all else fails, wouldn't it be nice to get an extra 20 damage on your Mega or Primal? That'd be nice too. Or say in just about any deck, while the Floatstone would be good in almost any deck, you can also consider the Muscle Band in any deck. If you don't need the 20 extra damage that turn, because you're trying to set up for a KO later or something, you can bounce the Muscle Band back to the safety of your hand, where it's harder for your opponent to get rid of it. Oh, sure they can end it, but you'll always get it back from your deck. So that's not really nearly as bad as if it stays attached to that Pokemon. And if you switch Pokemon, you can put the Muscle Band on the new Pokemon thanks to Masquerain. So it can make one Muscle Band act like as many as 6, in theory, in the sense that you could put up any Pokemon and it would always have the Muscle Band if you want. Even if it had another item on it, you could always pull them both off and put them back down, because Masquerain doesn't limit the number of times you can use its ability. In fact, even Hard Charm operates in a similar way. Hard Charm getting a little more notoriety these days than it had before. For instance, if your Pokemon's about to get KO'd and the Hard Charm no longer makes much of a difference, you can bounce it back to your hand and put it on somebody else, or just hold it for the next Pokemon. Or once again, you can switch it off one Pokemon that went out and put it on a new Pokemon to play a defensive role. So Masquerain, really quite the interesting card with a lot of applications, a lot of creative possibilities. And that card is definitely worth a second look, as a lot of players have already begun to discover. So until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and check out my channel for more Pokemon content.